Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 66. Well, this is a bit awkward. One of my oldest viewers said to me once that he likes that I plan ahead, and I don't constantly try to put out fires. And yet, here we are. We are going to spend quite a bit of time chasing our tails today. Right after we managed to solve a shopping issue in Mutagrad, now we have electricity issues. Thankfully, it's not going to be a major problem, just a couple brownouts in the city, but we will get messages about similar outages happening in Brooklyn and Grad as well, which tells me that our current power plants are close to their limits. As for the water systems, I did manage to get most of it down at this point, and I will go around at the start, and I will try my best to explain what's happening. All in all, we are only at the point where the water needs of the citizens will be taken care of once everything's built, and the water requirements for the industries that need a dedicated water connection. For the drinking needs in other factories we'll have to wait until everything else is sorted. The only industrial building that still needed rebuilding was this concrete plant in Adamski. After this one is built, all of them will have their necessary water inlets available. Just in case, I tried to add a triple helipad, but there was no room, so I just put the single landing pad back in. So, let's take a quick look at what I've did so far with the water system. For the different industries that only require water, but not clean water, I just added a pump in a relatively elevated position, and I will let the extracted dirty H2O flow down into the factories. For Kirkimov, we had 2 fabric factories, so I also added a big pump, because during my test the water had a hard time finding its way into the facilities for some reason, even though it was going downhill the entire way. I also split the sewage lines going out of Valentinsk. Merging them into a single line was a bit much, and the throughput wasn't high enough. This will also allow us to bring the industrial waste there, and hook them up to those switches, and that will bring it down to the treatment plant. I also told the local distribution offices to start moving chemicals to the different treatment facilities, so I don't forget it later. Also, we are going to add quite a bit of traffic to Mikhailovia when we do enable the water system, so to lessen the strain on this area, I better move the gas station. Quite a bit of the strain comes from its inclusion. I also lowered the traffic light timings to 10 seconds. We are about to remove the temporary long-haul trucks from the area. To replace the gas station, I decided to place it here, at the end of this long street. Out of the way for most traffic. And there, the railroad ring around Mutagrad is finished. We can at long last start setting up the signals to their final configuration. Before I do that, I wanted to continue building these bridges, so we can reach the other side of the river. That will only require the usual construction crossing we've been using since forever. It will be too close to the construction site however, so I will end up sending the track layers home quite a few times. Once I'm fed up with it, I will just move it down a bit, but that will cause them to go all the way around on the cross-country tracks. It will increase travel time, but at least they won't require constant babysitting. Anyways, as you can see, I started changing the signals to their final configurations. The ring itself will be the planned one-way system, so both lanes will go in the same direction. I made sure to save right before I started messing with the signals, just in case we crashed. Thankfully, we somehow avoided it. To continue building the chemical branch, I'll add a construction crossing here as well. We still have quite a bit of work to do. At this point, this crossing is no longer necessary, so it can be removed. And at long last, the rail CO can be set into its final configuration. Returning track layers will enter from the right, and they will leave to the left when going to do some new job. And at the end of the ring, they will merge into the proper two-way network, each lanes going in one of the two possible directions. All that's left now is to place down the Q signals, so more than one train can use the longer stretches. I will manage to get most of them right now, but I will discover two sections that will not be signaled properly. While all that is going on, I believe I promised that I will explain why I set up the water system the way I did. So, all in all, we are going to have 8 small water wells for each city at the start. That is more than enough for the citizenry, which is by design. I want to use the excess production for the industries that need to run at peak efficiency. I haven't decided how to do that part exactly. I will most likely end up using trucks to move it, using the loading stations. Anyways, those water wells will feed into 2 big water treatment facilities each. Those have 4 inlets, so the 8 water wells will be split between them equally, and they also have 3 outlets. Those will go straight into a big water pump each, and each of those pumps feed the clean drinking water into their own individual storage tanks. With 2 in each city, that will give us 6 in total. That will leave 1 outlet on those big pumps free to use later. I haven't decided yet how to use them. I will most likely feed them into a 3rd tank, which will be connected to the truck loading stations, which is where I will pick up the water for the industrial workers. But as I've said, I want to take care of the critical part of the systems for now. I will worry about the optional water consumers later. So, from those storage tanks, the water will flow downhill into the different substations in the cities. After the water is consumed, and turned into sewage, the waste will be collected in the sewage tanks. From there, they will flow straight into the sewage treatment plants. There is one big facility between Valentinsk and Mikhailovia, which just about manages to handle both cities. Anyways, let me break my train of thought. We had the first signs of the impending power issues in Mutograd. With the ever-expanding population, we managed to hit the limits of the current setup. Thankfully, the heating in the houses wasn't cut long enough to cause a dangerous amount of downtime. We managed to bounce back fairly quickly, only reaching about 14°C. Since the original transformer is already using all of its connections, we need a second one. Fortunately for us, we already had a high voltage switch ready to go nearby. And I believe we already built an extra substation, because the new shop and cultural buildings were just out of reach for the original stations. Adding one more should be enough to fix the power outages. Anyways, to finish my explanation of the water system, I also added a small sewage plant for Mutograd, and all the sewage will be fed into that. As for where we dump it, the big facility between the old cities will release the relatively safe waste into that artificial reservoir we've dug out a while back, and Mutograd's waste will end up in the river, a little bit down the stream, not far after the rail bridge. Alright, let's get back to it. We will keep sending the track layers home until I get bored of it, and move the crossing a bit further down. Not long after that, I will also delegate the bridge to the old rail CO, and the new guys will work on the chemical branch instead. Oh, and you could catch a glimpse of the water setup from Mutograd back there. Okay, time to hook up that new substation to the power network. Since it's such a densely packed area, it requires a bit of ducking and weaving to get around. I kind of gave up on having a well-organized wiring at this point. The recently moved gas station in Mikhailovia is done. It only needs fuel deliveries, and it's back in business. Since the destination is on the other side of these parallel wires, we need to go under them. I am also happy to see that the shopping and other service issues in Mutigrad are a thing of the past. At this point, the biggest complaint we have are unemployment. At least the biggest one we care about. I was about to add the train deliveries for the consumer goods, when I was again distracted by power notifications. The sooner we get this done the better. To ensure that really nip this in the bud, I decided to add a second extra substation to that new transformer we placed. That will ease the strain on the system even more. After making sure that helicopters can reach it, I proceeded to add the cabling, and at this point, I completely forgot about adding train deliveries to the local warehouse. Don't worry, I'll remember it later. I am way past caring about building an orderly network at this point. Technically, we only needed to juggle these track layers until they finished building the pillars and the steel trusses, but by the time we reach that point, it will be down to the original duo. I will make the mistake of adding passenger deliveries to the chemical factories before I finish the electrification, which will force me to divert these two to that part of the network. As long as heating isn't impacted too much, we will be just fine. And I finally remembered to add those train deliveries. I also made sure to include the chemicals, since we are getting close to starting up the water system. Let's not forget about the meat. The same as before, we will have a dedicated line, using 4 refrigerated wagons, and we will also tell the train to wait for a full unload before going for a fresh delivery. I think I'll use mesocombinate for this one. I also made sure to rename the old Mutigrad line to Valentinsk, since the city's changed name since then. At this point, I decided to start construction on the Mutigrad water facilities. At least some of it. I don't want to overextend my construction capacity. And the citizens are already getting happier. We dropped pretty low in the last episode, but we are getting better. Okay, that's the pillars done on one side of the bridge. And we already had consumer goods deliveries arrive at the town via train. At this point, those temporary trucks are unnecessary. And I just found a part of the network where I forgot to place the Q signals. So, let's get rid of the unnecessary traffic on our roads, and send these trucks to the depot. And it's full. Oh well, I think I don't mind selling 3 of them. And would you look at that? The new excavators are finished. Let's send them home. 4 goes in Adamski, and 2 to the border. I also ordered a lot of microbuses for our water system. We already had 20 waiting in the depot for the 2 original cities, but we still needed 10 for Mutagrad, and 10 for the big sewage plant. Thankfully, the small one in the capital will be in walking distance, so that one doesn't need a commuter service. So, from now on, only trains will deliver goods to Mutagrad. That will help lower the traffic in Mikhailovia considerably. Thankfully, now that it's spring, the power load is lower than it was before, so it's not as urgent as it was during winter. This is where I finally decided to give up, and move the crossing back a bit. It's temporary anyways, so I don't mind if it's ugly. Since this crossing is now after the split that goes into the city from the bridge, the track layers are forced to use the cross-country railroad to get back to their office. But at least they don't require constant babysitting anymore. And once they do manage to start building the tracks on the bridge itself, they will be able to use the original crossing, so it's twice as temporary as a normal construction crossing. Just to be sure, I did check on the substations in the city, and now they show less than 100% use if we take all the other stations into account. That should deal with the brownouts we've been suffering from. I also started building the bridge going to the airport. Until we have more important things to build, we might as well move forward on this front too. That's a pretty nice increase in loyalty. That TV station really know how to do its stuff. This is where I will make the mistake that will force me to divert the new track layers to the chemical branch. I forgot that we still needed to electrify the area, so I just released the passenger train that was supposed to ferry workers from Mutagrad to the new chemical plants. It will be able to reach the city without issues, but it will get confused, since without catenaries, it won't be able to reach the chemical passenger station. I'll run into some pretty ugly patches of grass growing on my rail tracks, so I'll stop a couple times to get rid of them. Onto the one-way ring around the city. And into the city station. And since it cannot find a way to its destination without electrifying the tracks first, the train got confused. At first I thought it was a signaling issue. As far as I could tell, the passenger station itself was already accessible. Well, it is, but only for diesel trains. Using the magnifying glass tool did show me what the problem was. That feature can be very hit and miss at times, but it does show the correct place of the problem more often than not. There. Now we just need to tell the track layers to worry about this, instead of the bridges. It seems a construction crossing is in order. At least until we get past the one we already built. Alright. Once the tracks beyond that other crossing are electrified, this new one becomes obsolete. Let's make sure that they can see that one of the platforms in the station is occupied. Yep, they dutifully go around the confused passenger train. And the bridge going to the airport is almost done. Despite the chaotic nature of the episode, we are still making progress. We might as well clean up the trees around these tracks. I love a good dense forest, but I'd rather not have falling branches on my rails. At this point, I was ready to enable construction on some of the industrial water systems. The chemical plant in Electrograd, the concrete plant in Lukovo and the border outpost, the fabric factories in Kirkimov, the concrete plant in Adumsky still needed its water facilities built, since it didn't have the necessary connections before we rebuilt it at the start of this episode. The new chemical plants I completely forgot about. But that's fine, it will be done quite easily when the time comes. We still have the fabric factory in Autozov, which I'll deal with later. At this point, the only real issue in Mutograd is unemployment. All other complaints are taken care of. Maybe I should build a big distribution office to move materials for the rail CO. The current one has a hard time supplying it. On the other hand, once we move on to projects that are much farther away, it won't be an issue anymore. I'll think about it. Here, I kept adding more construction sites to be built for the water system. And to keep progress going, I also told the old rail CO to work on the bridge. Because of the distances involved, it will be slow going, but slow is still better than doing nothing. This is where I almost built a bigger shopping center closer to this cluster of houses. But before I could commit to it, I will be distracted. I won't get back to it today, but I did add it to my to-do list as I was editing, so hopefully I'll remember to do it in the next episode. I just wasn't sure where to put it. The most logical place would be next to the rail CO, but that's a bit ugly. I might move that museum to make room. And the distraction came in the form of another rolling blackout in E-City. This was starting to become concerning. At this point, all the new substations were done and working. So I couldn't blame it on the lack of throughput anymore. And checking the wattage on the high voltage line showed relatively low load on them, not a single red line in sight. These medium voltage lines, however, were acting real weird. I was fairly certain that I used the biggest possible cables throughout the entire construction, so having red on one half of a line, and having green on the rest was really weird. Since the same type of cable was used on the entire length, if the load was too heavy here, it should be too much on the entire line, not just at the start. Just to be sure, I checked, and the thickness of the different cables is pretty obvious when we simply look at them, so just by eyeballing it, I was fairly certain that we were using the biggest cables. And yet, it was acting strangely. Just in case, I did check, and at these above ground connection point, it was possible to connect different capacity wires together. Still, I was convinced that wasn't the issue. My next thought was that despite my previous checks, maybe we had a bottleneck somewhere along the high voltage line, so I decided to add a secondary supply line coming in from the export branch. Well, at least one side of the bridge is almost done, so that's something. As I've said, I will bring in a secondary power line from the branch going to the NATO border. Because we have quite a bit of construction going on with all the water, it will take a while for this one to be finished. I still cannot really wrap my head around this weird behavior. I foolishly unpaused construction on the airport too. We have a lot of construction capacity, but there is still a limited amount at our disposal, even if it's a big limit. At this point, I decided to stop building the water, and divert more of our offices to the power problem. Good thing we are dealing with this during spring and summer. Doing this in the dead of winter would have been a bad idea. And we started getting power notifications from Brooklyn. This is where I started checking the load on our power plants, and indeed, they are going at full tilt. I was really hoping we could get by with the current capacity until we can build a nuclear power plant, but to get that one going, we need a lot more power. Sure, the end result will be all the electricity we will ever need, but to create the nuclear fuel cells, that will take a lot of juice. I think in the next episode, I will stop selling power altogether, and start importing some. Once the new power plant is up and running, we can go back to exporting. By the way, I did stop selling power to NATO for now. Yes, in theory the game should prioritize domestic consumption, but that isn't always the case. As you could see, we had power troubles in Brooklyn, even though none of the cables were even close to overloading. So it was mostly down to the lack of power generation capacity. And yet, the coal plant was exporting the full 9 megawatts we set before. So the domestic priority is really hit and miss. At this point, all the chemical sub-branches are designated for construction. We can take our hands off it, and it will get built on its own. And we just got a notification that one side of the bridge over the river is done. Good times. I'll enable notifications for the passenger station's tracks, so I'll know when the confused train should get with the program. Because of the distances, sometimes the food levels in the Mutagrad warehouse can get a bit low, but I'm safe in the knowledge that the deliveries are on the way. At this point, I decided to stop everything else, and concentrate on the power issues. The Adamski office was still working on the industrial water systems, so I went around and stopped those too. Okay, we got the notification for the passenger station track's completion, and indeed, the train is now on its way. Okay, this worker delivery will get us back to relative normalcy. With that, the old system is back. Now we just need the extra line coming in from the export line to see if it does anything. So far, the power seems relatively stable, but I don't really trust it. And I'm still not sure what to make of these red and green cables on the same line. I have a strong suspicion that it's just a graphics bug. At this point, only a single piece of track was left of the chemical district construction. And the first workers just arrived. They won't be able to do anything, since we don't have the materials yet, but it's coming. We will need to wait for the crop's harvest, but in the meantime, we can start moving the gravel and crude oil with the rail distribution yard. For some reason, this train thought it would be a good idea to move coal instead of gravel. That's what I get when I don't set the material restrictions fast enough. When I notice that it's going towards Ramosov, I'll discover the error, so no harm done. I did set the restriction on the storage facility before, but since the conveyor is going through a tower, the station cannot really tell what it's allowed to drop off. Since I set the delivery destination restriction while I was unpaused, the office decided to do a coal delivery too, just in case. Anyways, it's fixed now. This is the correct train. And I ran into another section where I forgot to place Q signals. We already have crude oil in the local storage, with another train waiting to drop off even more. And here comes the gravel. At this point, we only need to wait for the first harvest, and these chemical plants can start making the stuff. So, we might as well add the warehouses as a possible pickup point for chemicals. There. For all intents and purposes, this chemical manufacturing district's up and running. The worker numbers are still low, and we still need to add a small water and sewage system for the production process later, but that's not critical at this moment of time. Now that we have 2 high voltage lines going to the city, I'll re-enable power exports. But as I've said, I might stop it again in the next episode, and start importing instead, at least until the new power plant is finished. And just to satisfy my curiosity, I did decide to rebuild one of the bright red sections on these cables. I made extra sure to use the biggest cable. But I can already tell you, it won't help. I am 99.9% sure that we only used big cables for wiring the city, so this weird behavior is not because of the inconsistent cable usage. Basically, the only way we could get red cables at the start and green cables later, is if I accidentally used smaller, lower capacity wires near the transformer, and then used bigger ones after that. Before this test, I did check them visually, and they all look like the biggest ones we can use, and this rebuilding will confirm my suspicion that something's really off here. There. Rebuilt with the biggest cable available, and it's still red, while the cable after this section is green. I have no idea what's going on. Anyways, all we can do now is hope that adding an extra high voltage line somehow fixed it. I have a suspicion that it's just a simple graphical glitch, and the wires after the red sections are carrying the same amount of charge. The substations are seemingly working as they should after all. But, since we did get power problems in Brooklyn and Grad, and our power plants are working at full capacity 24/7, it is obvious that we need a new power plant. And since we have oil and coal already, I think it's time for a nuclear one. Good thing we have those chemical factories going, since making fuel rods also takes a lot of that stuff. I think I'll build the entire processing chain right next to the power plant, and then feed the fuel straight into it. We will only need to bring in raw uranium or from somewhere else in the Republic, which is easy enough. To accomplish all that, we should start importing power from the Soviet side, just to make sure we don't run into any troubles until then. So, I think the next couple episodes will be dedicated to this endeavor. Anyways, I hope you liked the video. If you did, you can support me on Ko-fi, for which you can find a link in the description. If you are not the donating type, that is fine too, you can still support me by leaving a like, or subscribing to the channel, which just might motivate me to make more. Until then, see you later.